Next speaker, this is Kimberly Buddin, which you probably have already heard, but she's a Michigan attorney specializing in civil rights policy and governmental affairs. She has experience in civil rights, human rights, municipal, immigration, family, and criminal law. It's a lot. She currently serves as senior policy counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union in the Justice Division. Boy, that was the one that tripped me up. Okay. In this role, Kimberly works to advance criminal legal reform across the country through state and federal work. Please welcome Kimberly.
All right. Thanks for having me back. Good morning, everybody. I am here to talk to you a little bit about the legislative process and legislative advocacy. And the short title to this is How to Talk to Your State Legislator So They Will Actually Listen to You. Okay, so what I'm going to cover today is one, this is the whole Schoolhouse Rock thing, how a bill becomes a law. Legislative advocacy, what does that actually look like when you're sitting down doing meetings with policymakers? Testifying, so this is just my tips from testifying over the years, and a little call to action at the end. So, how a bill becomes a law. This is generally the same, so a lot of these slides will be sort of Michigan specific, but most states have the same sort of process. You should always go onto your state legislative website to confirm. Sometimes there are little things that are a little bit weird, but essentially a bill is introduced. Most of the time it's a single topic. Sometimes if it's multiple topics covering a bunch of different statutes, it's called an omnibus bill. And that just means that there's a bunch of stuff thrown into there. It's like very comprehensive, they're very long, and everybody hates them. But usually you'll find a bill is anywhere between 2 and 10 pages long. So the bill is introduced by a bill sponsor, a legislator. Oftentimes there are more than one sponsor. A lot of times it's just within one party, but sometimes you can get both Republicans and Democrats or whatever the primary parties are in your state to both sponsor a bill, and that just means that they are attaching their name to it, they are endorsing it, and then that is a bipartisan bill. Once the bill has been introduced, it gets sent to a committee, and the committees are developed based on sort of topic areas. So judiciary, covering things like the court, criminal justice, covering criminal justice, health, all of those different things. If the committee chair, which I'll talk about in a little bit, decides to go ahead and give the bill a hearing, which often does not happen, especially with criminal justice reform bills, if the committee chair does decide to give the bill a hearing, which means they will put it on the agenda, they will invite people to give testimony about it, they will hear from the bill sponsors, both proponents and opponents of the bill, and they may decide to eventually vote the bill out. If they vote the bill out of committee, it goes to that chamber's floor. So if it was in the House of Representatives, it will go to the House floor for all of the House of Representatives to vote on. If that bill passes, then it goes over to the next chamber. So in some states it's the Senate, some call it the General Assembly, it just sort of depends. And then the same process sort of goes through on that side. If the bill is all decided and everybody votes for it and you have absolutely no issues, because that always happens, right? And then it will go to the governor to either decide to sign it or veto it. There are some nuances here, but that I can talk about if you have questions about it, but that's the general process. Okay. So who are we even talking about? So this is Michigan numbers. I think it's very important that you make sure when you are looking to do legislative reform, you want to know how many people are actually in your state legislature and what is required to actually pass a bill. So this is just the numbers for Michigan. Typically, you will find your state legislator on their website. You can go to your state legislative website, type in either your address or your zip code, and their information will pop up. It might be a local office, but they should also have their primary office at the Capitol on there as well. Okay, so what do you do at sort of each of these different stages of the legislative process? So once a bill is actually introduced and sent to a committee, this is sort of where you have the most opportunity to make changes. Which can be good if it's something that is a negative bill, and bad if it's something that you are really pushing for and the prosecutors want to swoop in and destroy it. So I'm not bitter at all. It's never happened. All right, so I love them, really. So typically a bill has to be read, and it's literally them just reading the title of it multiple times before it's sent to a committee. At this point, when you're looking at the bill being in the committee, or it's not even been brought up for like a hearing yet, so it's just been introduced and assigned to committee, that's when you want to start really researching the issues and your legislators. You want to know who's in that committee, what districts are they in, what issues do they care about, know a little bit about like their background, who funds them. So I like to use votesmart.org. That is a great website to, everyone's like writing it down really, I guess I should have put it on the slide. Votesmart.org. Votesmart.org. I think it's a great website because you can look at donations to that particular legislator. You can look at prior committees, prior votes. It will break things down by issues. So I usually start there and look at who their funders are. That tells me a lot. And from there, I will go to things like looking at their social media accounts, or just looking on their general website to see what issues they care about. You can look at things like what schools they're connected to. It'll also have information about their partners or spouses. So if you happen to know somebody's spouse is a correction officer, that kind of gives you a little bit of background information about how maybe to approach that particular person. This is also where you're going to start kind of gathering your partners if you haven't done that yet. Most of us are in a network where we know who the partners are. So this is where we're starting to say, hey, just flagging for you, partner organization, that this bill is out there, and we would love you to X, Y, Z, right? This is where you're starting to also encourage your legislators. So if there has been a bill introduced, great. This is where you might start making those early phone calls to friendly legislators, letting them know about this bill, giving them the heads up, and then telling them why, sharing background information that you have. Once the committee has actually considered the bill, the thing that you can probably is most important to do here is contacting members of that committee. You can do that through email, you can make phone calls, you can send letters, and that is just a very specific ask, telling them to either amend it, reject it, support it, etc. Recruit all your friends and family. I think that's so fun. I think it's very easy to write a stock email and send it out to people and say, hey, click this button, send this to your legislator, because they will never hear back from that person, so it's fine. The other thing that you can do, which is a bit of a bigger lift, and I will talk about testimony, is actually attending the public hearing. You can attend and not testify. Just because you show up does not mean that you have to get up there on the stand. But sometimes just having a show of support for something, or a show of being against something, seeing the sheer numbers is important. You would be surprised how few legislators actually see people come to hearings or come to their office or talk to them at all, because most people are just too busy. Oh, and I just want to note that testifying at hearings is kind of particularly important if you have a personal connection to it, because they are tired of hearing from me and me just getting up there and saying, yeah, don't do this because it's bad science and racist. And I say that almost every hearing. It's like, this is racist. And they're like, I'm not racist. I'm like, I didn't say that. But why do you feel attacked? Oh, God, this is terrible. Okay, so next the bill gets debated on the floor. So again, this is assuming the bill has gotten out of committee and you've done all your work, you've gone, you've testified, you've got mobilization, the legislators, we're pretending this is a good bill because, you know, let's leave on a good note here, right? So this is abolish the registry bill, and and we got it out of committee. Everybody loves it. I clearly got good sleep last night. Okay, so everyone loves the bill in the committee, but we're getting to the floor now. We're waiting for the whole House of Representatives, so there's like 110 of them, right? And so at this point, again, we are contacting more legislators. You should be targeting, you're never going to be able to contact everybody unless your organization is massive. It's going to be very difficult to contact everybody. So you want to start thinking about who are the influential people. So looking at if there are groups within the legislature, like these little caucuses. Sometimes there's like a young people caucus. Sometimes there's like an Arab American caucus or a black caucus. And looking at who are the heads of those different caucuses, you want to be looking at who are the what's legislative leadership look like, starting to target those individuals. And by targeting, I mean finding people that are in their districts to make phone calls, send emails, put a little pressure on. But this is also where your research about those legislators is going to come in handy. So if you see that they went to a certain university and you go to their social media and they are diehard that, do you know somebody do you know a professor at that university? Is there a way to reach out to a coach or a football player or something? Like, start to get really creative. We have so many connections that we don't even think about that people are influenced by. You're going to start thinking if you can place an op-ed or a letter to the editor in a local paper that is in that particular person's district. There's a lot of stuff you can do to sort of get to one particular person. Okay, so then we get to the actual vote. Most states are a simple majority. Some states are weird and do other things, like 2/3. It just kind of depends. Again, this is why it's super important to understand what type of vote is required to pass your bill, because then you know how many people do I need to be targeting, how many votes do I need to be getting. And so if we're, again, pretending our bill passed with more than 51%. It was like 98% because everybody wanted this. I'm like, what year are we in? And so if the bill passes, then it will then go over to the other chamber, as I mentioned, and if it does not, it will fail, and the other chamber will never get to it. There is the possibility that somebody can ask for a reconsideration, but, you know, typically same day, people are not voting any differently. Okay. Then we do the same thing in the other chamber, and we get to, at this point, when the bill is in the other chamber, if I feel good about it, I'm typically kind of just touching base with, again, leadership there. So I'm reaching out to the committee chairs, I'm reaching out to the Senate Majority Leader, but then I'm starting to really, if I think I'm pretty solid there, at this point I'm starting to talk to the Attorney General and the Governor's office. And the reason that's important is because this is usually where they start to swoop in and go, actually, this is going to be a problem. Because they tend to ignore things until they actually think that they're going to pass because capacity. And so this is where I'm starting to have those conversations, making sure that if this bill comes to your desk, how are you going to act on it? Mr. or Miss Attorney General, are you going to try to actively stop this? Do you have any questions about implementation? So we can work those kinks out as much as possible. And whether or not the governor will veto or sign it, I actually tried to find an organization that has some in with the governor's office and see if we can't write a joint letter explaining why something is a good idea. And oftentimes that will get incorporated into their signing memo or into their veto memo. It's happened several times where they wanted to veto something and they were just like, but I don't know why. And I was like, because it's unconstitutional and racist. And so like you write a memo that basically says that and then it gets worked in. But it really is about sort of doing people's work for them. The easier you make the work for individuals, the better it is, the more likely you are to actually get a positive outcome. Yeah. No, this is, I mean, our imaginary bill is definitely passing, and so we are good. Yes, some legislatures can override a veto with, it just depends on the state. They can override a veto with a simple majority. Most state legislatures have like a 2/3 rule, and other states are like even weirder than that. It's like, I can't remember, there was some state.
But there are some where you can pass it with 51, get vetoed, pass it, like override the veto with the same 51?
With the same 50, it would have to be of the entire legislature, not just of one body. Not with just one chamber, though. Okay. Okay, so legislative advocacy. This is where most of, I think, the work that you all are doing right now comes into play, because we don't have a whole lot of bills to be going to testify on at this point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where do you meet, what are the different options, what to do before your meeting, during your meeting, and what to do after your meeting. Depending on your legislature, some of them may have things like in-district meetings. They may have events, coffee hours, whatever they call them. In Michigan, they call them coffee hours. They don't call them in-districts. Most states will call them in-district meetings. It's literally where they go to some place in their local city, county, district, and they just basically stand there for you to come and meet them and talk about things that are important to them, and usually like one or two people shows up. Most of the time, they will post these on their website. You can also check their social media, and that way you can get, usually they'll have them, some of them have a calendar where you can see them well in advance. Other times, legislators will just post them like a week or so before. You can kind of start to, if you're following them, you can kind of start to get an idea of how often they're doing them, which is usually something like once a month or once every couple of months. It might be more frequent if you have a shorter legislative cycle. And sometimes people just don't do them at all because they don't want to. And that's fine. Because the other thing you can do is go to their events, especially during the election cycle. This is super fun to just go up to a legislator who is like trying to control their narrative and push for their issues and say, hey, what about the registry? They love that, so totally do that. I am all about making them uncomfortable. And then finally, you can go to their actual state office. Of course, this is a little bit more difficult because it's located in your capital, and not everybody lives in their capital. Excuse me. Oh, wait, this is so cute. I'm sorry, I got distracted. Okay, so they will have usually a state office at their capital, but they may also have a local district office. So check for both. If both are not listed on their website, call and ask for the address. You can show up, you can make an appointment, etc. I'm not going to go through all of this really specifically, and I will send my slides out. just some tips for thinking about, now that we are not in the deep trenches of a pandemic, but, hey, who knows what might happen in the future. But also just generally, if you are confined or if you have health issues, or just if there are reasons that it make it difficult for you to physically go to a legislative office, some tips about thinking about how to work with legislators. Phone calls is one option. These are, if you are not if you are not tech savvy, phone calls are definitely an option. I think this is not the best option because there is something about being able to actually see somebody's face, especially with this particular issue, that is super important. So I don't totally recommend that for this particular issue, but it is a backup option, making phone calls. It makes it a lot easier for somebody to rush you off the phone as opposed to rushing out of a meeting. So just something to think about. Virtual meetings, you can definitely set up virtual meetings. I think a lot more legislators have been doing this lately, even outside of the pandemic. It just makes them a little bit more accessible. So while you can certainly meet with them in person, sit down, talk with them, which I think is ideal, you also can set up a virtual meeting, do it over Zoom, etc. One recommendation here is figuring out your technology beforehand. The other thing I'll mention is most government organizations use Microsoft Teams because it's encrypted as opposed to a Zoom. And so if you request a meeting, you don't get to actually set that meeting up. They will send you the link for it. So make sure you understand and know how to use Teams or have it downloaded so you're not struggling with it at the time. It's very different. It's very different. And most people hate it, but yeah. Oh, look, and I have a whole little thing like this is the difference between Zoom and Google Hangouts and Teams. Okay, so do your research, know your community, what issues are important to you, what issues are important to them, who are you representing specifically. Are you just representing yourself? That's totally fine. And then know your legislators. What is their background? What are their positions on things? Are they new? Is this their first term? How influential are they? Do you think, any political aspirations? And then what other organizations are out there that might be talking about this issue? So when you're doing your research, this is just only one of these people is actually still in office. But typically you can go on their website, you can click their committees, you can click their issues, you can click news and see what they've been working on. This stuff is populated by their team. So this will tell you where their priorities lie. This is information that they control, which I think is a good insight to how they want to be seen, what they want the public to know about them, and what they care about. The sort of votesmart.org thing is like the behind the scenes stuff. It's like, oh, okay, this is how I get to you when the cameras are off. So again, reading your background information, make sure that you're comfortable talking about the topic, generally speaking. Be prepared to have any handouts or talking points or leave behind material. Plan your time out. So especially if you're going with multiple people, you need to make sure and identify who is talking about what order, who's going to be making the ask, what is the goal from the meeting, who's taking notes. My pro tips, make sure that I like to have something in writing to leave behind. I think that's really important. I save it until the end of the meeting. I don't hand it to the legislator when I first come in because they will spend the entire time just staring at it or playing with it or flipping it over and pretending that they're paying attention. So I do not hand them anything when I first come in. I hand it to them at the end. which says this summarizes and should answer any questions that you have. When my contact information is below, and I think I get to this later. Okay, so then again, decide who's attending. I don't think bringing any more than 4 to 5 people is a good idea. Some state legislative offices are really, really tiny, so sometimes it can be really cool to pack the room. Other times that can feel overwhelming. It's sort of a decision you're going to have to make. And then finally, be very, very clear on what your goal is. Everybody needs to have the same understanding of what their goal is. One person's goal can't just be to tell their story and be heard, while everybody else's goal is to get this legislator to commit to sponsoring a piece of legislation. It's not going to work. The meeting's going to go crazy. You guys are going to hate each other at the end. So make sure that you share a goal, a united goal going in. We are actually in the meeting itself. Be patient. They will probably be late. They're usually on really tight schedules. They might be in their office and continuing to meet with somebody that spills over into your time. Be understanding of it. It's not uncommon for legislators to actually send their staff to meetings instead. Do not be offended by that. Those staff are actually probably the ones that are reading the information that you're leaving behind anyways, and then summarizing it. So don't ignore them. Don't ignore their legislative staff. Don't ignore the person at the front desk who's the scheduler. Make friends with them. Eat their candy. That's what I do. Every single time. I'm like, you don't have any candy for me? And they're like, it's in my desk. I'm like, yes. At this point, I'm just in it for the food. So again, be respectful and never think that one person is more important in that office than another, because they really do work as a team. And they might be the one that helps bump you up on the schedule. They might be the one that helps, put your one-pager at the top of the pile. You never know. And then finally, keep it short and focused. You probably will only get around 10 to 15 minutes with your legislator. As you build a relationship with them, you might start to get 30 minutes. And then they start to just call you or pull you from the hall, things like that. So fun. It's like, I don't have anything else to do. Let me just go into this office for an hour while you talk to me about whatever's on your mind and your conspiracy theories. Guys, personal experience, it's crazy. I'm like, I have a hearing, but sure, let me hear about what's happening in that other country that you're scared is going to happen in Michigan. I hope he never watches this. He'll know exactly who I'm talking about, too. Okay. All right, so then stick to your talking points. Stay on topic. Obviously, this doesn't mean you can't veer a little bit, add anecdotes in, especially your personal narrative, but try to have what your top 3, 4, what are the things that you want this legislator to take away? What is it that you want to make sure that you've said to them? And it's absolutely okay to have notes, written notes. It's fine to refer to them. Please don't just sit there and read something to them. Don't read a report. Don't overwhelm them with data and information. They were not going to remember a bunch of numbers. If you have like a significant number that is like astonishing that they should know, wonderful. But save that information for your leave behind and your materials like that. Provide examples. I think that this is the most important thing, because again, we're getting lots of data. We're getting lots of advocacy groups coming in and telling us policy-wise why this is important. What is the impact that this is having, especially if it's in their district, right? If you can talk about something that's happening in their particular district with a particular law enforcement agency, add that information in. Tell them the city that it's happening in. Tell them that you're a resident of that particular area. It provides an extra connection, and it makes them really care about it. They're like, okay, the people that I'm serving that are electing me to be into this office are being impacted by this, so I need to pay attention. And then finally, most importantly, it's okay to say that you don't know. Do not make up an answer. Do not make up an answer. Say that you don't know, that you're not sure. You will check into it and you will get back to them, especially that last part, because what that does is create an opening for additional contact. I say this all the time in meetings. I don't know the answer to that right now, but I can look it up and I will get back to you. What that does is show that you have some integrity behind the things that you're saying. It shows that you don't know everything and that it's okay that that legislator doesn't know everything as well, and that, hey, some of this is, let's find it out together. And then again, solidifying that there's a follow-up. So the general meeting agenda, introduce yourself, members of your group. Again, you should identify ahead of time if somebody is going to do the introductions or if everybody's going to do introductions themselves. It can be slow. Remember that. You may have 10 minutes. So if everybody goes around the table and there's 5 of you introducing yourself and the neighborhood that you're from and why this issue is important to you, you've eaten up most of your time. So think very carefully about what do those introductions look like. Mention any connections that you have to them. Have you met them before? Or do you want to thank them for something that they've done recently? Do you live in their district? Do you have friends in common? Did you go to the same school? Things of that nature. They love that crap. They do. They're like, I also went to Michigan. They're like, wow. I'm like, yeah, like me and millions of other, but you and I, like, write this right now, like, yes. They're like, oh, go Blue, we are best friends. And I'm like, yeah, now pass this bill. So then you start the discussion. This is where you're going to start kind of generally, this is what the problem is, and then be prepared to discuss details of the issue and how it relates to those particular goals. This is the part that most people forget. Hold on. You have to actually make an ask. Oftentimes, legislators will take over a meeting. They will stop you kind of midstream, and they will say, yeah, you know, so-and-so came in here about this. I'm just really not sure. This is what my position is. And, you know, I just need to read a bit more material, but I thank you guys so much for coming in. I really admire all the work that your organization is doing. We just, you know, we're going to look at this bill and we're going to think about it. And you're like, oh, okay. No. That's when you say, okay, I really appreciate that. We're asking at this time that you sign on as a sponsor. We're asking at this time that we can count on your vote in committee. Can you tell us whether or not that's something you're willing to do? And they will never commit to you. And that's fine. You've made the ask, right? But they need to know that you are going to try to hold them accountable. The other way allows them to control the narrative and sort of brush you off. You coming back with that very solid ask lets them know that this person is probably going to follow up with me and be tracking my actual vote, right? This is not just another meeting and they're trying to just say they met with so many legislators. This person is probably going to be tracking my vote. So that is really important. Make a solid ask of them. And then conclude, this is where I hand the materials. Again, why you don't do it early on, because they're like, oh, I'll read this over, great. And you see them put it on top of like a stack like this. This is where you leave them a leave behind. Make sure that you have your contact information in there, and then let them know that you plan on following up with them. On your way out, make sure you get business cards for the legislator, for their scheduler, for their legislative staff. I just grab all the business cards and then I just like figure it out. So I just like leave with like business cards and then candy in my hand, and I'm just like, great. It was a great meeting. You guys think I'm joking? I like really do that. Every single time. They're like, I put new candy out for you. Thanks. I really like Starburst. Seriously, I'll be walking in the Capitol just like, they're like, hey, Kim. I'm like, what? All right, so after the meeting, you want to report the results of it. So if you're with a group, go back, kind of debrief. get everyone's idea about how they thought the meeting went, where they think that particular legislator is leaning. Most of the time, you're going to feel way more hopeful. So, like, take that, like, if you think the meeting went like an 8, it's probably like a 5 or a 6, right? I say that to just, curb your excitement, because legislators they've been doing this. They know how to make people feel like they're going to deliver and then not do that, right? So I say, like, knock that score down like 2 points at least. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It just means that that person is not as committed to it as you may believe. So that they're going to need a bit more hand-holding, a couple more touches from their district. And then follow up. If you told somebody you will follow up with information, do so. Most people don't. So when they do get somebody that actually follows up, that sends that follow-up email, that says, here's the information we discussed, X, Y, and Z, thank you for your time. It is so important. And then you call their office and say, I sent this email. I know Senator so-and-so was curious about this. I sent it over. Can you let me know that you've received it? And then finally, even if you didn't need to follow up with the particular information, I always send a thank you email. Thank you for meeting with me. Again, here's the information. Here's that leave behind that I gave you in person in a PDF form. So you have it everywhere. And then here's my contact information. I'd love to, have another meeting with your office when the bill gets to whatever stage, right? Okay. How am I on time? 20 minutes? Perfect. Here's my bread and butter. Testifying, my favorite thing. Again, you just write it and say it's unconstitutional and racist, and you're good to go. One time my friend put they compiled a bunch of different testimony videos of me just saying that over and over again. Because I was like, there's no way it's just always. It's in every single one. It's well, it is. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how do you prepare for your hearing, writing your testimony, giving oral testimony, what to expect, and how to handle tough questions with my little tips and tricks in here. 2 types of testimony you can give. So again, this is the hearing where you are in front of a legislative committee. So typically, most legislatures don't have you go in front of the whole body. Sometimes they might have some sort of special session where they bring everybody in, but usually that's an invite-only type of thing. Most hearings are public. They are usually mandated to be public. You can find out when a hearing is going to be, either by doing one of 2 things. One, if you are aware of a particular bill, you can track that bill. Most legislative websites have something that says follow this or track this, and you might have to sign up, and that for sure will put you on the mailing list for all of the election materials, but it's worth it. And so that will let you know anytime the bill goes to a different committee or there are new changes in it, et cetera. And the other thing you can do is follow just a general committee. So you can go on and say, hey, I want to know what the Criminal Justice Committee is doing all the time because it's probably bad. So I'm just going to follow that committee, and every time they have a hearing, they'll post it. You'll get notification about when that hearing is. They're typically the same day at the same time every week or every other week or whatever. Okay, so you can give written testimony. You can either provide it in person, physically going to the hearing, dropping it in. Sometimes you can email it to the clerk. They don't love that because it makes their job difficult because they are required to print out everybody's testimony and send it around. But, if you write testimony at the last minute, like I do, just email this and send it. And they're like, no, sorry. You also can send it directly to the committee members. Again, this is why knowing their staff is important, because how many emails do you think a state legislator is getting every day? And are they going to necessarily see your testimony and read it before a committee hearing? Probably not. And then next you can give oral testimony, which is where you're actually present or via Zoom, and you're either reading or talking off the cuff like I tend to do. If you have written testimony, do not make it long. Do not send your entire life story. Do not send attachments. 1 to 2 pages, no more than that. They will stop reading. Make enough copies for the legislators, as well as some additional copies to give to their staff, and then 1 copy for the clerk. That's important because it gets filed into the written record. The other thing I want you to remember is that this information is public, so please be mindful about the information that you are sharing, because it may go on the state website. Your contact information about your personal narrative, so be mindful of that in what you choose to share. If you have data, cite your sources. Don't just say a study. You have to put it in there. The reason that's important is because if you have somebody that is for the issue that you're talking about, they are going to say, oh, look at that. Oh, this actually came from this reputable source. Oh, this actually came from the Bureau of Statistics. That sounds like this person's not making it up. If you've got multiple points, use headings. Make it easy on them. Again, that's what this is all about. Make it easy for legislators to understand what you're talking about. They want to read the headline and then skim the rest, and read the headline and skim the rest and see like 1 or 2 data points, right? So when you're actually writing it, think about the content. Think about the content that you want them to pay most attention to. Address it to this is basic stuff, but address it to the committee. Make sure you have the bill number and what your position is. Be really clear. Support, oppose, neutral. And then finally, include your contact information. When you're testifying orally, whether over Zoom or actually in person, make sure that you're thanking the committee chair, even if you don't like them, and the members of the committee for giving you time. Oftentimes, you only have like 3 to 5 minutes. If there's a lot of people testifying, you might have 2 minutes. So you wrote this long testimony. You need to be able to say, these are a couple of points I'm going to highlight here. Don't repeat things that other people have said. Actually, my tip is if somebody has said a good point, I usually say, I'm not going to repeat all of the points that so-and-so said for the sake of time. They love that. They're like, yes, save us time, Kim. I'm like, yes, give me my brownie points. Yeah, I'm like, so this is the only thing I want to touch on. And I say, boom, boom, boom. This is what I think you need to do, right? And then conclude to see if there are any questions. So what to expect, I won't read through all of this, but generally the setup is they're up there in their little seats, and it's usually divided by party, and the committee chair and the vice chair are sitting in the middle. Typically what you have to do is fill out a card or some little piece of paper indicating that you want to testify, or that you are showing support or that you're against something. It just says it on there and how much time you want. Find a seat that doesn't require you to do the scoot thing, because that's just annoying, and if they're recording it, then you're just on camera forever scooting past a bunch of people. It's very embarrassing. Not that I'm speaking from personal experience. Just like, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. And everyone's just sitting there like, come on. The agenda, again, you may have a committee that's meeting for an hour, and your bill might be one of 2, it might be one of 17. So remember that when you're like, oh, I'm going to have 5 minutes. Maybe not. Maybe you have 1 minute. Maybe they won't even get to you, because the chair determines the order of both testimony as well as bills. And also the chair can decide to give somebody 20 minutes and decide to give you 1. It's up to them. So handling tough questions. Again, we don't make things up. Say you'll get back to them if you don't know the answer, and then actually do it. Do not argue back and forth. Don't interrupt. It actually looks a lot better if you sit there calmly. Yes, there will be times when they pretend they have a question and it's just a really negative comment, and you're not meant to respond. I try not to respond. Every once in a while, they'll get you and you're just like, actually. use facts and data to counter rhetoric, right? This is why it's so important that you be as well versed in the issue as possible. It seems unfair that people can just talk about their feelings and we have to be the ones that are just fully prepared and have all this like armor of information and science and resources. But if that is what's going to get this stuff moving and get people to understand, then that's important. Also remembering that if that happens to you, probably that legislator is not going to change their mind just in that meeting, but you now have it on the record, right? And sometimes that is the goal, is getting this person to have, that said something negative, one, exposing that, and then two, being able to counteract that with truth. And then finally, just remember that on really controversial topics, like this tends to be, you will likely not have the last word. They will probably turn your mic off if you're me. They will. Yeah, they gavelled me one time. I was like, you can't even do that. I'm not a legislator. He's like, calling you out of order. I was like, I don't work here. It was really funny. My job is weird. Okay. Some pro tips. Again, make extra copies. If you have testimony, make extra copies. Leave them behind. There's usually like a desk outside. That's where I leave stuff. And then the press takes it, which is really fun. And then they'll publish parts of your written testimony. And they may not even contact you, which is really weird, I think, because I feel like they should. But there's been times I'm like, oh, I'm in the press, and I never talked to this person ever. But they just pulled my actual testimony and quoted me. I was like, well, I guess that's what I left it for. Your written testimony, make it quotable. I know that sounds dorky, but people love that crap. The press loves it. Organizations love it. They'll tweet it out. Find things like anecdotes that you can just kind of add in there. Cite from a variety of sources. So do not just cite from the ACLU and Brennan and Vera. That is too one-sided. You have to be able to cite from more neutral sources if possible. And typically, that information comes from something else as well. So if you have a data point that came from one of our organizations, which I think is great, don't ignore us, go back and see where we got that information from. Because typically, I would prefer to cite directly from the DOJ than from the ACLU, right, from our own report. Oral testimony, if you have provided written testimony and then also plan on talking orally, I said this before, but for the sake of time, I won't read my entire testimony because you have it in front of you, but here are a few things I'd like to highlight. What that does is say, I'm respecting your time and my time, but also I wrote something and you should read it and it's in front of you, so pay attention. And then here are the key highlights of that information. And then also mentioning, like referring back to your written testimony during your oral testimony. So if there is, especially if there are questions, I'll say, as you can read more in my written testimony, again, I constantly am referring them back like, yeah, y'all are gonna read this at some point. Refer them back to it during questions or even just while you're talking. For those of you who are on social media, especially if you have somebody there, I love to live tweet. I don't know if you guys are following me yet, but if you're not, you should be. I love to live tweet from hearings. I take pictures of the legislators. I say, we're at this hearing following this bill. I tweet at legislators. And then when I am getting ready to testify right before or after, I will put those memorable quotes, those headlines, those particular things on my Twitter. And I try to use their hashtags. Most legislators have a hashtag. You have to find it. You have to Google it. But it is the thing that legislators will click on to see what people are talking about. So make sure that you either at that legislator, make sure you're atting that legislative body or that party or whatever it is. Sometimes the committee will have its own handle. use the hashtag. That's how you start to ensure that people are looking at things. And my tip is take photos and use the photos, because if you're posting on social media things that have photos, get a lot more views than things that are just words. Seating, again, find a seat close. I really must have been traumatized by the incident. Find a seat close to the aisle if you're planning on orally testifying. And then, I mentioned this before, but remember that this is public record. So if you even are just putting a submission card in, you're not even submitting written testimony, remember that your name and information will also be part of the public record. So don't put anything on there that you don't want out to the public. And that's it.
I would like to ask you about your strategy of dealing with, if you're in an area that is controlled by that party, you have to tailor your content to match, if you're in a 90% Republican district, you have a different message than if you're in a 90%.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, absolutely. You're always speaking to your audience. One thing I tend to do is, especially if I have like written testimony or something like that, is I might bury like what my favorite point is as like the third or fourth one, because they're probably like, we don't care that this is racist, but they may care that it has a socioeconomic impact. They may care about the impact that it has on the economy. And so I put those things first, or I may talk about those things. And then in a meeting, I might talk about those things in particular. And then the leave behind might also have the racial data in it, right? So that's why having that background information is so important, because you know what things to highlight. You know if your legislator is, really interested in the Chamber of Commerce and in workers' rights or worker compensation. So like, oh, I need to make an economic impact argument. Or are they, did they formerly work for like child services? And so you want to talk to them a little bit about the impact this has actually had on families, right? So you're tailoring. You should have multiple talking points that fit multiple mindsets. Yep.
Hi, Kim. When we testify as a group in Nebraska, we always try to make sure we share with what we're going to say. Each individual has something personalized of what they say and then their points.
I love that. Yes, absolutely.
Does Michigan's legislature have a consent calendar?
Yes. I'm like, is that a trick question? Yes.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yes, so we do have a consent calendar. It's just essentially where we have to agree on,
Sorry.
how do I explain this? Yes, yeah, the chambers, not we, I'm not part of that process, nobody cares what my opinion is. The chambers have to agree on what the priorities are and which versions of different bills they're going to move forward, et cetera. It's not as rigorous as some of the shorter term legislative bodies are, because we have a year-long legislative session, so it's not nearly as complicated or as rigorous as that.
Sorry, I was asking that because I learned about what the consent calendar is this year, and
So fun.
Yeah.
Just in your spare time, you were like, let's look up consent calendars.
I am actually a total nerd, so I watch the sessions every day.
Yeah.
But there was a bill regarding civil commitment, and nobody opposed it except me. And my opposition was in a comment, and that didn't count because it was not in personal testimony.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, I was pretty upset about that. So everybody got on the floor to debate it, and they're like, "This is an unopposed bill. This is an unopposed bill." And
Interesting.
Actually, it was. And they're like, "Well, you have to be in person for it to count." So that was a learning experience.
Yeah.
For me.
That's trash.
There we are. Thank you. I was wondering, you've given some amazing information. Do you have any resources for novices that you like that you could recommend, either books or videos?
Yeah, so Schoolhouse Rock and this slide deck. And no, yeah, resources. I mentioned votesmart.org, Ballotpedia.
Sorry?
Ballotpedia.
Ballotpedia.
Yeah,
Okay.
just Ballot. Thank you for making me spell in front of everybody. Pedia. I don't know if it's .org or .com.
Specifically, I was wondering, has anybody written a book that kind of covers a lot of what you're talking about, but in real detail, or that you know
I
of?
wish. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Maybe. Probably somebody. I do not know the answer to that.
Again,
Ooh. Yeah, on maternity leave, I'm going to write this book for you.
thank you.
Just for you. Dedicate. What's your name?
Rich. Thank
Rich.
you.
Dedicated to Rich, who made
Again,
me spell in public
Thanks again.
on the mic. Oh, there we go.
Okay, you were discussing about state legislatures and
Yeah.
changing their laws. I found something from the city of Milwaukee. There is misinformation here, and I
Okay.
would like your feelings, beliefs, how to change this. I would like to just briefly say two things. They say, whereas a study by the US DOJ has shown that when convicted SOs re-enter society, they are much more likely than any other type of offender to reoffend, rape or sexual assault. They also say, the Common Council is aware of many studies and reports concerning recidivism of sex offenders and the effectiveness of sex offender residency restrictions, which obviously that's not true. What is the best way to deal with this locally on the municipal level? Because all the little suburbs around the Milwaukee area basically say the same thing.
That's a resolution that has already passed, or is it something they're
Yes.
considering? Yeah,
Yes.
I would go in during public, they have a public testimony component of it, if you're comfortable. And I would, do they cite the DOJ study that they're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's probably an old one from 1998, I think.
Yeah, I would pull that, and then I would pull the more recent one and say, actually, this is what the DOJ says, and provide that. The other thing you can do is write a letter, like a letter to the editor, publish something locally. I would do both probably afterwards. And then if there are members of that city council, I would write a letter to them and provide them with the accurate information and data points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when testifying, should you be transparent that you're on a registry, or should you only mention it if specifically asked?
I'd say do what's most comfortable to you. You will probably get asked either way. So sometimes I've had people that go up and say, I'm on the registry. This is what my story is. Other times I have people that are coming from just coming from an organization, and legislators tend to ask a little less when you're coming from an organization. If you're coming up as an individual, sometimes they will ask, but it's personal to you. I think be prepared to be asked, and think about how you want to respond to that. And you may be asked specific details, and it is okay to say, I'd prefer to talk to you after the hearing if you'd like to know more about my situation. Hi.
Hi. So relative to the person that asked about resources,
Sure.
one of the people in Florida did the most amazing thing on one of our calls. They looked up Wikipedia. And if you look on
Crazy.
Wikipedia, under Florida Senate Elections 2024,
Yeah.
you can get the most amazing information about everybody who's running and who's not running. It was
love
so
it.
helpful.
Yes, I love it. I mean, Literally, just Google searches. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you all.